Right. Good evening to all friends and colleagues and those who are online at this time and at this moment. The weather shows signs of rain, so the light is still on, but I can hardly be visible. But I believe that what matters most is what I'm going to say, and you know, so that is the case. Today, in the next 20 minutes, we are going to look at some. We are going to look at a statement Daniel made. It was actually prophecy, at the time that he made the statement. But I believe that it's long been fulfilled now, and so we are going to look at it from two perspectives. One from the time when that prediction was made, and the time when it was fulfilled, and the conditions that were to accomplish or that were to fulfill this prophecy. And so it's Daniel chapter number 7. It's Daniel chapter number 7. It's one of the texts. It's one of the many texts people have issue with, because part of it contains some element of apocalypse or apocalyptic language. And so those who are unfamiliar with the use and application of the apocalyptic language, they always uh, go straying from the intent and the purpose for which for which Daniel made that statement. And then, so in Daniel chapter number 7, verse 13, through to 14, I am not going to look at entire chapter, but I'm going to look at, these two verses, because it's the, it's the, is the, is that aspect which actually climax the importance of the entire chapter. And so there we see uh, Daniel saw in a night vision the coming of a son of man in the clouds of heaven. Okay, the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven, you know, at the ancient of days. And in the verse 14, it talks about, or he ties this cloud coming to or with uh, the time of the kingdom and the time of dominion, or what we call the restoration of dominion of the saints. So in these two verses, we have one, the coming of the one, like a son of man in the clouds in the ancient of days. And again, it says that there is also that time will also be the time of the kingdom and the time of the dominion. People have looked at this, and because of the way Daniel worded it, they have taken it to be the what occurred at the ascension of the Lord. And because in Acts chapter number 1, verse 9 to 11, talks about the Lord, talks about the Lord, taking up, received in the clouds out of the eyes of the apostle. People think that this has to do, or Daniel chapter number 9, verse 7, Daniel chapter number 7, verse 13 through to 14, pertains to that coming of the Lord into the most holy place or into the Father's house. But if you look at it carefully, you realize that it's actually a second coming of Christ text, rather than uh, the going to the Father's house text. Okay, so to correlate Daniel 7 to John 14 and Acts chapter number 1 will be a mistake, because there we see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And most of the New Testament eschatology, are founded upon Daniel 7, 13, 14, because all the clouds coming of the Lord in the New Testament are actually taken from many Old Testament texts, and one included or one is Daniel chapter number 7. So that is why sometimes it's imperative for you to study the Old Testament in order to understand the New Testament, especially one which involves eschatology or the study of the last days. Okay, so is that. But in this text, as I said, we see the return of the Lord in the clouds of heaven, and that is key. That is the key statement or the key uh, word or phrase in that text. And so, those who argue that this pertains to uh, the going to the Father's house, you know, by Christ, will have a huge, dilemma because there, when you look at it, it's the same quote from, or it's the same quote of Matthew chapter 24, verse 30 through to 31, and that occurs in the first century generation per verse 34. So when you look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, it says, or verse 34, it says that all this will occur before this generation have all died. So it means that what the Lord said. But by the way, when we look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 31, 30, 31, it talks about the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. Okay, so there you have it. A quote from Daniel 7, verse 13 and verse 14. Because remember, that text also involved the regathering of Israel. They are going to be regathered into the kingdom. So just as we have the dominion, the restoration of dominion and the kingdom to Israel, as in Daniel 7:14, as the apostles, inquired from Christ whether at that juncture, prior to his ascension, he was going to restore the kingdom to Israel. That, of which the Lord told them that, of the time and the season, that is the same of the time and the season, no one knows, because that is held in the Father's power and authority. And so, um, in Matthew 24:36, the same statement, was also, Jesus also made the same statement, in terms of when that, his coming was going to occur. He said that of that day and hour knoweth no man. So you see the correlation between uh, Acts chapter 1, verse 11 and verse 11, and out of Matthew chapter number 24, verse 36. Okay, but both of them, were quote from Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and verse 14. So we see also in Matthew chapter 24, some element of kingdom there. Okay, so now, not only the kingdom, but we also see the restoration of the dominion of the saint. Now, remember, Adam had this dominion. The dominion is not necessarily what was in the garden. Okay, what was in the garden wasn't the dominion, but the dominion was righteousness and life, and that righteousness and life were emanating from the tree of life. Okay, the tree of life actually afforded Adam the ability, the righteousness, or the justification to appear before the Lord, whenever the Lord enters the garden. Okay, and that was his dominion. Okay, it wasn't the crops, the trees, the animals, and the stuff that he was tending in the garden that constituted his dominion. But his real dominion was the tree of life, of which, because he saw righteousness, justification, and everything from it. So Christ came in order to restore that justification or restore the dominion to saints. Because in Galatians chapter number 3, verse 21, it said that if there was given a law which could produce life, then certainly righteousness would have come from the law. So the quest of man was to search for, or search for the restoration of this dominion, but that was impossible as far as they were kept under or so long as they were kept under the law, because the law could not produce, life or eternal life. Okay, but it was rather the gospel, that produced this eternal life, and or bestowed eternal life upon those who were born of the gospel. Because in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14, Christians are called through the gospel. And in John chapter 3, verse 3 to 5, you also see the correlation between being born again through the gospel and many other texts. So it was the gospel that was actually going to bestow the dominion, of sin. And in the text to justify this is Romans chapter number 1, verse 16 and verse 17. So let us understand this. But as I was saying, so when we talk about dominion of the sin, it is actually life and righteousness. Okay, in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 8, 9, 17 through to 19, it says that the law could not, bring one to Christ. However, there was annulling of the former. The former was the old covenant, of which the the law, the Torah, formed the central theme, or it was built upon the Torah, and it could not bring Israel to God, to bring them into the most holy place. But on the other hand, there is a bringing in of a new covenant through which we draw near to God. And so through this covenant, which is built upon the kingdom, the gospel, and so on and so forth. That one was bringing believers to Christ. Okay, and it was restoring this dominion as well. But anyway, so this is what we are talking about, and so let's understand that um, Daniel chapter number 7 was actually the cloud coming of the Lord, isn't its ascension, okay, into the clouds, into the most holy place, but it was rather, it speaks of it as his, return of the Lord. Because even when you consider, preceding text, you realize that it talks about the little horn that was killing the saints, and the coming of the Lord, the Ancient of Days. And judgment was made in favor of the saints against this little horn. All these things are judgment language, and this thing did not occur when the Lord ascended on high. So it was rather his coming that saw the destruction of this little horn that was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. In Matthew chapter number 23, verse 31 to 38, we see Israel, old covenant apostate Israel, making war against the saints. Okay, so we saw the Lord coming in AD 70 against them, by destroying their temple, their city, and everything. And so we cannot associate Daniel 7:13 to 14 to Christ's ascension, but it was rather his parousia in AD 70. And so that is that. But when is this going to occur? When is the Lord going to come in the clouds of heaven? When we look at again Matthew chapter number 7, Matthew chapter number 24, there are many signs that were given. However, the key among this sign was the preaching of the gospel to the worldwide. Okay, so for the end to come, because the end will be the time when the Lord comes in the clouds, okay, to destroy little horn, to destroy those who were prevailing, who were making war and prevailing against the saint. That occurs at the end. So it cannot be said that Daniel 7 was Christ going to the Father's house. It was rather his return to destroy those who have trouble the saints, and also invite the saints to himself or into the most holy place to dwell with him, so that where he is, that is the most holy place, which is a component of the new tabernacle, that we may also dwell with him. Okay, so it says that the end comes after the promulgation or after the publishing of the gospel worldwide. Okay, so this is what we have to understand, that we ought to let the Bible, interpret itself. You just don't have to interfere. Just let the Bible interpret itself. The fact that there's evangelism today ongoing does not mean that Matthew chapter number 24 was unfulfilled or it was postponed, as people sometimes try to argue. But remember that in Revelation chapter number 21, we see both the Lord and the Father and the Son reigning together, and it says that the gates into the most holy place, into the heavenly tabernacle, will never be shut. So it means that the fact that Matthew chapter number 24, was fulfilled. That one was a eschatological statement. Okay, that one is an eschatological statement, and so that was fulfilled. So now, once we have the kingdom gate open, evangelism still goes on. God still invites people to himself, in the world, forever and ever, in the world without end. My Ephesians chapter 3, verse 21. Now, so let's see whether, according to the Bible, the condition, okay, for the end to come, the condition that will invite the Lord, or that will occasion the cloud coming of the Lord and his and his invitation of the saints, into the most holy place actually occurred. Now, uh, alongside the clouds coming is also the sounding of the trumpet. Now, I wouldn't want to get into this more, but the little that I want to say is that the sounding of the trumpet, the shofar, the blowing of the shofar, or the Yom Teruah is actually also a quote from Isaiah chapter 27, verse 10 to 13. But there you see the correlation between the sounding of the trumpet and the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and also the time of the consummation of the salvation, okay, which God made it a promise to to Israel. So Paul, I wouldn't want to get into it, but this is what I want to say, because the sounding of the trumpet, these attendant elements are also in association with the same judgment upon Israel in AD 70. Anyway, and so this was the deal, or this is the condition, that will, occasion the end. For the end comes, or at the end, the Lord comes in the clouds, to judge. Now, in Colossians chapter number 1, verse 5 and 6, and Colossians chapter number 1, verse 23, I am giving you the text so that you can do the studies on your own, because the Paul, who was living in the eschaton, okay, Paul was living in the end. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11, says that the end has come upon them. So they were living in the eschaton. And the Lord comes at the end, but the end comes after the publishing of the gospel worldwide. And so in Colossians chapter number 1, verse 5 and 6, and Colossians chapter number 1, verse 23. Again, we have Romans chapter number 1, verse 5, and Romans chapter number 1, verse 8. We also have Romans chapter number 10 and the verses 18. And we also have, many other texts. I believe there are ones I have to, I have to, recall, I have to recollect. But, let me see if I can add another one. But these are the texts, at least they give credit to the fact that the gospel was preached to the world in the first century, everywhere, to every creature, to every inhabitant, to every inhabitable earth, all the way in the first century. They are just there for you to read. The end comes after the gospel is preached worldwide. But the apostles living in the first century said that they said that indeed the gospel has been preached to the then known world. See, when you talk about the world, you have to just look at whether it was Okumeni and so on and so forth. So they said that, well, this has been preached to all the inhabitable earth, to every creature, to everyone, and so the end belongs to the first century, and that end comes after, or that comes immediately, that is fulfilled when the Lord comes in a cloud. So this is how we have to understand it, and not to associate Daniel's event to the Lord's ascension. It was rather his descension, it was rather his coming in, his second coming that Daniel had in mind, and that comes after, or occurs in the first century, by the way, but that will also come after the publishing of the gospel, after when the gospel has been preached, worldwide. Matthew 24:14. Of which the apostle said that indeed this has been achieved and this has been fulfilled. So if you let the Bible interpret itself, you realize that this is not something that we are waiting for, this is not something we are looking for, but this is something that has been fulfilled all the way back in the first century, and now we live in a world without end, as the Bible has stated. So the end belongs to the first century, specifically when at the overthrow of the Jerusalem temple and the city, and the enslavement of the people and the killing of the people and so on and so forth that occurred in AD 70. So that is that. We have to end here. Come your way some other time to we meet again. Say bye.